And this is a point that the Europeans made from the outset of the negotiations. It was known right from the start that the Europeans, in effect, were speaking for the United States, and that Iran could have a different relationship with us as well as the Europeans. They just had to do one thing. They had to abide by the treaty obligation that they had freely undertaken not to pursue nuclear weapons. They had to abide by the agreements they had made with the International Atomic Energy Agency not to engage in weapons-related activity, and to be honest and open and truthful about the nuclear activity they were engaged in. And they had to demonstrate that they were prepared to continue this behavior into the future. The Europeans tried for over 5 years to convince Iran to take these simple and straightforward steps, to demonstrate that they had no nuclear weapons intention. And for this entire period of time, Iran strung the Europeans along, using the time in a way absolutely critical for any would-be nuclear proliferator, using this critical asset that they couldn't buy for love or money, time to overcome all the complex scientific and technological difficulties to achieving a deliverable nuclear weapons capability. Time is almost always on the side of the nuclear proliferator, and Iran very carefully worked the Europeans to gain this time to get closer and closer to a deliverable nuclear weapon. This is an example of how diplomacy can be used against the people who engage in it with the best of motives. The Europeans tried, in the language of diplomacy, to use both carrots and sticks, incentives and disincentives. And I can tell you our European friends are very good at proposing carrots to regimes like Iran, and they proposed ever greater amounts of carrots if only the Iranians would honor their commitment not to pursue nuclear weapons, and the Iranians consistently refused to do it. So that where we stand today is that after all of these years of diplomatic efforts, the Iranians have not been dissuaded from continuing to pursue the strategic objective they set almost 20 years ago. We had turned a few years earlier to more direct methods to approach them, to impose economic sanctions. The U.S. had had economic sanctions against Iran for many years, but we sought to have our European friends also impose economic sanctions. We sought to impose sanctions through resolutions of the United Nations Security Council. We passed 5 resolutions that demanded that Iran suspend its uranium enrichment activity. 3 resolutions that imposed sanctions. In the face of all of this, the government of Iran has continued its nuclear weapons program. The sanctions have not affected its decision-making. They've not turned Iran away from the continued pursuit of nuclear weapons. And I think it's clear now in present circumstances that the government of Russia, to a lesser extent the government of China, are not going to accept new economic sanctions in any meaningful sense that would really have an impact on Iran. Now, we have asked ourselves many times, how is it that the government of Russia in particular doesn't see that a nuclear-capable Iran, at least in the near term, is more of a threat to Russia than it is to the United States or Western Europe? That an Iran with ballistic missiles that can reach major Russian cities but not yet reach the Western Hemisphere poses a risk, the same risk of Islamic extremism inside Russia that we fear in the West more generally. What is it in Moscow that prevents the government of Russia from seeing the risk that they face along with the rest of us? And here, it's really very difficult to understand fully, but I think that if you look at the mentality of the current government of Russia, still dominated by Prime Minister Putin, no longer president, but still the dominant force, is that there's a mentality there that in a way has turned aside from effort at greater integration with the West. You know, 3 years ago when he was still president, Vladimir Putin said that the disintegration of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Really a remarkable statement. I think most of us would argue that the breakup of the Soviet Union was a fine way to end the 20th century. But that's not obviously the mentality that dominates in Moscow now. So that what motivates Putin and the ruling oligarchy, in many respects, we may look back on and see as an effort to reverse the catastrophe of the breakup of the Soviet Union, if not to recreate the entire territory of that former country, to reestablish Russian hegemony within the space of the former Soviet Union. This could well be one of the explanations for the military intervention in Georgia this past August. It may also be that Moscow wanted to show that it had every capability of controlling all of the pipeline routes out of the Caspian Sea basin. All those routes run through Russia or Iran today, with the one exception of the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline that runs through Georgia. We may well see efforts by Russia to increase its influence in a variety of ways in Ukraine, for example. We know that Russia has handed out passports within the past few months, as it did in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, to ethnic Russians, thus giving it a pretext for subsequent military intervention. This is going to be an extraordinarily challenging time in dealing with Russia to take this behavior that can only be described as belligerent behavior and make sure that they don't learn the wrong message in the Kremlin, that we don't show weakness that simply invites further provocation. And it may well be the same attitude that we've seen displayed in the territory of the former Soviet Union that's at work in Russia's calculation on how to deal with Iran, how to deal with the United States in the broader Middle East peace process, of being obstructionist, of supporting Iran's efforts to get nuclear weapons, to provide cover for Iran in the UN Security Council. This is a threat of extraordinary magnitude in the region for the United States, for Israel. I'm afraid our options at the moment are very limited. Given this 5 years of diplomacy that we've seen, the potential for Iran to achieve that long-sought strategic objective of deliverable nuclear weapons is very close. So we see now in Israel a government that has been in political turmoil for quite some time, elections coming up early next year, shortly after the United States inaugurates a new president. Whenever there's a transition of power, there's always a certain element of uncertainty as the new governments take hold. This could be a period of real vulnerability or a period of real opportunity. If we pursue vigorously the objective that both President Bush and President-elect Obama have stated, that it is unacceptable for Iran to have nuclear weapons, we can deal with this threat. There is still time. But make no mistake, if we don't stop the Iranian threat, if we don't deal effectively with North Korea, other nations are watching and will draw the appropriate and very dangerous conclusions. If Iran gets a nuclear weapons program, others in the region will want the same capability. Perhaps Saudi Arabia, perhaps Egypt, perhaps Turkey, perhaps others. And the more states that have nuclear weapons, the greater the risk that one of them will decide to use that weapon first, not necessarily against Israel, but perhaps even against one of its fellow Islamic countries. Once it starts, though, very hard to control. So even though it's a time of celebration of the 60th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel, even though in the United States we're preparing to inaugurate a new president, the context in which all of this takes place remains a threatening and challenging environment. So I think the work that is done through Chamah, the concern that all of you express for condition of average people in Russia and Israel here in the United States, very important in hopefully in resolving this larger geopolitical challenge as well, because obviously the lives of citizens in all three countries can't go on unaffected by this larger crisis. Combined with the economic crisis, It's a very difficult time indeed, and therefore the inspiration, I think, that you provide, the work that Chamah does, the support you give for it, is something we all need to cherish. I wish you the best of good luck in the organization's work, the best of good luck for Israel and the United States as well. Thank you very much.